This tree is being cut down because there's demand for it. The demand exists because of its healing properties. The healing properties confirmed by science. The science exists, but it never made it onto a prescription pad. One question: why? Let's start not with the tree, let's start with the bill. A person with type 2 diabetes in the United States spends somewhere between $4 and $12 a month just on metformin, the most basic first-line medication. That sounds manageable until you add the quarterly blood work, the doctor visits, the kidney function monitoring, the dose adjustments as things gradually get worse. Stack it all up, and you're looking at $600 to $1,200 a year. And that's the optimistic version, no complications included. The part nobody mentions clearly enough: this isn't a course of treatment. There is no finish line. It's a lifetime subscription. Now hold that number and picture something completely different. Madhya Pradesh, central India. A tree called Vijaysar. That's its Hindi name. Locally, people also call it Vijaysar. The British botanist William Roxburghs gave it a Latin name in 1795, Pterocarpus marsupium. In English, it goes by Malabar Kino tree. The heartwood, the deep red inner core, gets carved into a small cup. You pour 200 to 300 milliliters of cold water into it. Leave it overnight, drink it in the morning, no prescription, no lab, no invoice. This isn't folk magic. The practice is documented in the Karaka Samhita, one of the foundational texts of Ayurvedic medicine, traced back to roughly the 1st or 2nd century BCE. That's not a legend passed down around a fire. That's a written medical record older than most of Europe's universities. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. In 2017, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, added Pterocarpus marsupium to its red list with the status near threatened. The reason? Overharvesting for timber and medicinal use. The tree is disappearing precisely because it's valuable, not despite it. And then, in 2018, a company called Sami Sabinsa announced a 10-year reforestation project, 250 acres in the Seoni and Balaghat districts of Madhya Pradesh, over 166,000 trees. That sounds like conservation. It is, partly. But Sami Sabinsa also happens to extract and sell pterostilbene, the key compound from this tree, as a premium nutraceutical supplement. The same molecule that soaks into a $3 cup overnight now retails in a capsule bottle for $35 to $65. The industry already knows. It just knows it differently. And a clinical study published in 2017 in the International Journal of Basic and Clinical Pharmacology, 56 patients with poorly controlled type 2 diabetes, 12 weeks, showed statistically significant reductions in fasting blood glucose when Vijaysar extract was added on top of existing metformin therapy. Not instead of it, on top of it. There was an additional effect even when metformin was already doing its job. 1 cup, 1 tree, thousands of years of documented use, 1 red list entry. And the obvious question, sitting right there, what exactly is inside that heartwood that makes any of this possible? That question has a very specific answer. And it starts with the structure of the heartwood itself. The deep red core of Pterocarpus marsupium isn't just dense wood. It's essentially a concentrated biochemical reserve. 4 distinct classes of compounds, each doing something different, all working at the same time. Understanding what they actually do is what separates this from every other ancient remedy story you've already scrolled past. The first compound is pterostilbene. Structurally, it's a close relative of resveratrol, the molecule that made red wine famous for about a decade before the hype faded. But pterostilbene is not resveratrol. The difference comes down to 2 methoxy groups attached to the molecule instead of hydroxyl groups. That's a small chemical swap with a large practical consequence. It makes the molecule significantly more fat-soluble, which means it crosses cell membranes more easily, stays in circulation longer, and gets absorbed far better when taken orally. A 2020 study indexed in PubMed confirmed pterostilbene substantially outperforms resveratrol on both antioxidant and anti-inflammatory measures. So, if you've ever bought a resveratrol supplement thinking you were getting the best version of this molecule, you weren't. In a controlled animal study published in ACS Chemical Toxicology, Pterostilbene at 40 milligrams per kilogram produced the same reduction in fasting blood glucose as metformin at 500 milligrams per kilogram. Same outcome, but the dose needed was 12.5 times smaller. And the mechanism, completely different. Here's why that matters. Metformin works on one target. It suppresses glucose production in the liver by activating an enzyme called AMPK. That's it. Pterostilbene hits three targets simultaneously. It suppresses the same liver enzymes as metformin. It also activates a separate pathway, PI3K, which is the same signaling route insulin uses to push glucose into muscle cells. And on top of that, it reduces oxidative stress, which is the primary mechanism that damages insulin-producing cells in the first place. Metformin manages the symptom. Pterostilbene addresses the symptom, the upstream signal, and the tissue damage, all at once. That's not a herbs versus pharma argument. It's a fundamentally different architecture of action. The second compound is epicatechin, a flavonoid also found in dark chocolate and green tea, but present in much higher concentration in the heartwood. In laboratory conditions, it stimulates the conversion of proinsulin into active insulin, increases oxygen uptake in fat cells, and raises glycogen content in muscle tissue in a dose-dependent way. It's not acting as a general antioxidant here. It has a direct, documented effect on the insulin signaling axis. Then there are two compounds specific to this tree that you won't find listed on any supplement label, marsupsin and pterostilbene. Both show documented anti-hyperlipidemic activity, meaning they reduce triglycerides and LDL cholesterol. That's significant because roughly 80% of people with type 2 diabetes also have metabolic syndrome, and elevated blood lipids are part of that picture. The heartwood isn't just targeting blood sugar, it's addressing the broader metabolic environment that surrounds it. So, when you drink water that's been sitting in a Vijaysar cup overnight, you're not drinking herbal symbolism. You're drinking a dilute solution of 4 bioactive compounds that work on separate molecular targets simultaneously. The fact that this happens through a carved wooden cup rather than a pharmaceutical manufacturing line doesn't make it less real. It just makes it harder to charge $60 a bottle for. And Sammy Sabinsa figured that out. Their product Pterostil Max packages the primary compound in a capsule. $35 to $65 for a 30 to 60-day supply. The same molecule, a different delivery format, a very different price point. But here's what even the capsule doesn't address, and what no blood glucose reading will show you on a lab report. Every standard diabetes medication works on the same assumption. Manage the glucose level, keep the number in range. That's the goal, that's the metric. That's how success gets measured. But there's a process happening underneath that number that none of those medications touch. Beta cells live in clusters inside the pancreas called the islets of Langerhans. Their job is to produce insulin. Under chronic high blood sugar, they take a sustained hit of oxidative stress, the same cellular damage that accelerates aging in every tissue in the body. Over years, those cells don't just underperform, they deteriorate structurally, which is why most people with type 2 diabetes don't stay on one medication forever. They add a second, then a third. Eventually, some move to injectable insulin. Not because metformin stopped working, but because the tissue it never protected kept breaking down quietly in the background. A study published in the International Journal of Basic and Clinical Pharmacology tested seed extract of Pterocarpus marsupium on diabetic rats at 2 doses, 100 and 200 milligrams per kilogram. After the treatment period, researchers examined the pancreatic tissue under a microscope. What they found was full structural normalization of the islets of Langerhans, restored acinar cells, normal intralobular ducts, recovered architecture. The group that received only metformin showed the same blood glucose reduction, but their pancreatic tissue looked nothing like the treated group. The structural damage was still there. That's the distinction that almost never gets discussed in a doctor's office. Lowering blood sugar and restoring the tissue that produces insulin are two completely different things. Metformin does one. This extract did both. One honest caveat, and it matters. This regenerative effect is most relevant early. Prediabetes, metabolic syndrome, early stage type 2. Someone who has been insulin dependent for 15 years isn't going to reverse significant pancreatic atrophy with a wooden cup of water. That would be a harmful thing to imply, so it won't be implied here. But the person who is 30 pounds overweight, whose fasting glucose crept above 100 last year, who hasn't been diagnosed yet but is clearly heading somewhere, that's exactly who this is most relevant for. Prevention, not replacement. And this is where the story opens into a second layer entirely. Because the same molecular mechanisms at work here, reducing oxidative damage, triggering programmed death in abnormal cells, regulating how cells divide and grow, these aren't exclusive to metabolic disease. They're the basic toolkit of cancer prevention research. And two other compounds connected to this same conversation operate through that exact toolkit, in documented specific ways. Neither of them requires a trip to India. One grows as a common shrub in temperate gardens across Europe. The other forms silently on birch trees in the forest. Berberine comes from barberry, Berberis vulgaris, a thorny, unassuming shrub that grows in hedgerows, old gardens, and forest edges across most of Europe. Hardy down to Zone 4, which covers Ukraine, Poland, Hungary, most of Central Europe with zero problems. You might already have one in a neighbor's yard and not know what it is. The active compound sits in the bark of the roots and the inner stem, not in the berries, which is where most people instinctively look first. Clinically, berberine has been compared directly to metformin in human trials. A meta-analysis confirmed the effective dose, 500 milligrams 3 times a day with food, totaling 1,500 milligrams daily. Below 900 milligrams, the effect becomes subclinical, which is exactly what most commercial berberine capsules provide, marketed as a convenient once-daily pill. One capsule in the morning is not a therapeutic protocol. It's a packaging decision. Beyond blood sugar, berberine shows documented effects on cancer cell lines. It induces apoptosis, blocks the cell cycle at the G1/S transition point, and inhibits tumor cell migration. These aren't theoretical mechanisms. They're published results from controlled laboratory work, with IC50 values against various cancer lines ranging from 10 to 40 micromolar, depending on cell type. Then there's chaga, Inonotus obliquus, the black, irregular growth you've probably seen on birch trunks without knowing what it was. It's a fungus, common across Siberia, Scandinavia, and Eastern Europe. The active part is not the dark outer crust. That's mostly dead bark tissue. It's the dense rust-colored inner mass. The compounds that matter are triterpenes, betulin, betulinic acid, inotodiol. In a live animal study published by Chung et al. In 2010, chaga reduced sarcoma 180 tumor weight by 33.7% over 20 days. Laboratory tests showed cytotoxicity against breast, lung, and liver cancer cell lines at IC50 values below 10 micromolar. One important distinction: a standard water-brewed chaga tea is a water-soluble extract. The triterpenes are fat-soluble. Hot water pulls out polysaccharides and antioxidants. Useful, but not the same fraction tested in oncology research, which used lipophilic extracts. The cup of chaga tea and the compound that reduced tumor weight in animal studies do not come from the same brew. 3 plants, 3 different sources. Pterocarpus marsupium for the pancreas, Berberis vulgaris for metabolic and cellular regulation, Inonotus obliquus for oxidative defense and abnormal cell suppression. The geography of where each one grows determines how accessible it actually is, and that's exactly where the practical question begins. Let's put actual numbers on this. A person managing prediabetes through commercial supplements, berberine capsules at $20 a month, pterostilbene or resveratrol at $40 to $55 a bottle every 30 to 45 days, quarterly blood work at $30 to the $50 each time, is spending between $800 and $1,100 a year, before any diagnosis, just staying ahead of a number that keeps moving in the wrong direction. 3 plants, 3 completely different price points. Barberry is the easiest entry. A Berberis vulgaris seedling costs $2 to $5. After 3 years, it produces harvestable root bark. That's where the berberine actually lives, not in the berries. The bark is yellow in cross-section. That yellow color literally is the berberine. Dry it at room temperature, grind to powder, or make a tincture with 70% alcohol at a 1:5 ratio for 2 to 3 weeks. The full clinical protocol, 500 milligrams 3 times a day with food, entirely from your own garden. Cost after year 3, 0. The capsule version of that same compound runs $216 to $264 per year. And if you're in Central Europe, barberry likely already grows within walking distance, in an old hedgerow, a park, along a road edge. Most people pass it every day without knowing what it is. The Vijaysar cup is the middle tier. Order one through Etsy or IndiaMart for $8 to $15 shipped to Europe. A genuine cup is dark red, dense, and heavy. Pale or light brown wood is the outer layer and contains no active compounds at all. Cold water in the evening, drink it in the morning. One cup lasts 3 to 6 months of daily use. Annual cost, $12 to $24. The pterostilbene capsule equivalent from brands like Marsupium runs $320 to $440 per year. Chaga from birch forest costs nothing. The active part is the rust-colored inner mass, not the black outer crust. Dry it below 45 degrees Celsius. Higher temperatures destroy the triterpenes. A standard tea only pulls the water-soluble polysaccharides. The triterpenes, the fraction actually tested in cancer research, need a second step. The same material soaked in 70% alcohol for 2 weeks, then both liquids combined. That's the double extraction, and it's the difference between drinking antioxidant tea and getting the compound that showed 33.7% tumor reduction in controlled animal studies. Year 3 and beyond. Barberry 0. Vijaysar, cup $12 to $24. Chaga, from the forest 0. Blood work unchanged at $120 to $200. Total, $132 to $224 per year, against the $800 to $1,100 before. Startup cost in year 1, $15 to $35. The molecule didn't change. The delivery format did. So, why isn't any of this in a standard health advisory? Why doesn't a doctor hand you a pamphlet that says, "Plant barberry this spring"? The answer isn't a conspiracy. It's a single economic fact. To register a drug through the FDA or EMA, a company needs full-scale clinical trials. According to JAMA Internal Medicine, that process costs between $800 million and $1.2 billion. That investment only makes sense if what comes out the other end is protected by a patent, meaning you spent the money, you own the market, nobody can undercut you for the duration. Natural molecules don't qualify. Pterostilbene exists in a tree. Berberine exists in a root. The U.S. Supreme Court confirmed it in Mayo versus Prometheus in 2012. You cannot patent something that already exists in nature, which means no company will finance a billion-dollar trial for a molecule any competitor can sell tomorrow without spending a cent on research. The result is a specific kind of silence. Dozens of studies on these compounds are openly indexed in PubMed. Readable by anyone. Right now, nobody buried them, nobody needed to. Information without a marketing budget simply doesn't reach most people. That's not censorship. That's economics of attention. The nutraceutical market found its own solution. Marsupium can't patent pterostilbene, but they can patent a specific extraction process, build a brand, design packaging, and sell the same molecule for $55 a bottle. They're also replanting 166,000 trees in Madhya Pradesh, genuinely. But that reforestation project exists to secure their own supply chain, not to make Vijaysar cups available to everyone at $3. The barberry story in the United States makes the pattern visible in a different way. Between 1918 and 1975, the federal barberry eradication program destroyed over 500 million Berberis vulgaris bushes across 30 states. The stated reason was real. Barberry serves as an intermediate host for wheat stem rust, and eliminating it protected commercial grain crops. But the clinical value of the plant was never part of the conversation. The program was funded by federal government and the grain industry. A shrub with documented metabolic and anti-cancer activity was systematically removed from the American landscape over 6 decades, and in some states, Planting restrictions on Berberis vulgaris still exist today. The permitted ornamental species is Berberis thunbergi, decorative, widely available, and contains almost no berberin. Meanwhile, India's Ministry of Ayush has officially included Pterocarpus marsupium in national protocols for managing type 2 diabetes as a complementary treatment, not first line, but formally recognized, which means the distance between folk remedy and state-acknowledged therapy has already been crossed somewhere, just not where the pharmaceutical market is largest. None of this requires outrage to be useful. It only requires understanding the structure clearly enough to act differently inside it. 3 plants, $15 to $35 to start. 1 growing season. Barberry in the ground this year. Chaga from the nearest birch forest this autumn. A Vijaysar cup ordered this week. Dark red, dense, genuine heartwood. While the container tree spends its first years on a windowsill, becoming something more than decorative, the knowledge was always there, in PubMed, in the IUCN Red List, in a Sanskrit medical text written 2,000 years before the first pharmaceutical patent was ever filed. What was never there was someone making money from telling you to grow it yourself. You don't buy this kind of independence. You grow it.